Um, I'm Bronwyn from Lowie. Thank you everybody for joining us. We've had 164 people sign up to our panel discussion tonight about COVID-19, its effect on the fashion industry and where we are going in the future. So we've set this up, but there's lots of amazing women on this panel, and to introduce them, I'm actually first going to introduce Kate Richards.
So to those of you who are listening in on this chat and live on Facebook, we have first up, we have Esha. So Esha is the founder of Omi Nana. Is that, I just want to check, Esha, that would be how I pronounce that. I don't want to...
Yeah, you're not too far off. It's Omi Nana.
Yeah. Omi Nana.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous name. It's also it's a beautiful online website. And you've been going for a year or more.
Coming up to our first birthday next month.
Quite phenomenal. And what I loved, I kind of did a long kind of trawl through your Instagram and your website. And you just reminded me of the very reason why I kind of ever fell in love with ethical fashion. I love the way you tell such a strong story about craft and the artisan behind the makers of fashion. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that, because having had my shop and kind of closing it down in December, I think I'd forgotten all the reasons why I ever fell in love with it in the first place. So Esha, you have really reminded me of the beauty of that kind of craft narrative behind the clothes that we wear. So anyone who hasn't gone and visited Esha's online store, you need to make sure that you do that as soon as this chat is over. And I think really I wanted to start with you, Esha, talking about seeing that you're very much into the narrative and the artisan and the craft and the story around the making process of clothes that we should really cherish and love. I just wanted to ask you some questions about what you think the impact of coronavirus has been on the garment worker.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really important area that we look at, especially going through a crisis like this. And I think it's fair to say that garment workers all over the world have been impacted by this, but it does depend on how hard they've been hit by COVID, and also like the measures that their governments are taking to handle this pandemic. So we have South Korea, which have taken a fairly relaxed approach. And on the other extreme, we have somewhere like India, which have taken quite strict measures. And, I think they put those measures in, that their lockdown happened in 4 hours. So you can imagine the impact that had on workers and businesses to try and react that quickly. It's quite something. And that has had a knock-on effect on, obviously, garment workers and their kind of position, which has become quite precarious. I think in India, I think it's like 12 million people work in factories, and millions more work in what they call the informal sector. So that's a huge amount of people that have been impacted by, work stopping. And the amount of kind of factories that have shut down is, there's lots. I think in Bangladesh, I think they're talking about over 1,000 factories closing down. And orders worth over 1.5 billion have been cancelled. So that impact on the economy, but also on kind of workers and their livelihoods is pretty significant. And I actually think that it's probable that those numbers are probably actually a lot higher, because there are so many workers that are not accounted for.
Yeah.
When you're nodding, I think you probably agree, but there are so many kind of different types of workers, like hourly based workers, and artisans, so the kind of people that the designers I work with, have close relationships with.
Piece workers as well.
Yeah, so many people that are not necessarily on kind of salaries or are working for kind of large factories. And also kind of farmers, if you think about the whole industry, the whole supply chain, it kind of goes back quite far. So yeah, it's definitely something that has hit businesses and workers, leaving a lot of workers without their usual pay slips, obviously meaning that they don't have money to buy food or cover rent, or just have that, the basic survival, the things you need to survive in everyday life.
And can I just ask a question? Why do you think, or the people, or two questions, I've got two questions. So firstly, what has been some of the conversations that you've been having on the ground with your stockists and suppliers, and how have they been faring, or those must have been quite hard conversations that you've been having?
Yeah, I think everyone's worried, and I think because there wasn't like a gradual transition like we had here, we had almost a couple of weeks where measures became stricter, and I think business was starting to plan about what they were going to do. They just didn't have time for that. It was kind of like, oh my god, we have to shut right now. So I think
4 hours.
There's a shock to that, right? And you can imagine from a business perspective trying to work out what you're going to do with 100 or 200 employees, in a very short amount of time. So the designers that I'm working with, it's, some of them are coping, some of them have got plans in place for like 6 months, but some of them are really struggling and they're kind of worried about how they're going to get through the next month. So it's a scale, I think, and that's dependent on how long they have been operating for. But yeah, there's a genuine concern because they're not really getting the support that they want from the government. Like here we have lots of kind of schemes to keep people going and businesses going. They just don't have any of that. There's one kind of relief fund for it's kind of for the poorest of the poor. It's called the PM Cares, which I find kind of a little bit funny because you would hope that the PM does care.
Yeah, at a bare minimum.
Yeah, but that doesn't actually, a lot of garment workers don't fall into the poorest of the poor category. They're kind of one step above that, but they're not getting their wages and they're not getting government support. So obviously in a really difficult position, and if businesses aren't given help to pay them, they're kind of left in a very tricky situation.
And I suppose that brings up the point of, whose responsibility is it? Like, why are we in this position, or why are they in that position?
Yeah,
where there is no safety net, and everyone seems to be using the loopholes. Kind of, I don't know whether, is it a brand's responsibility or a brand's shirking the responsibility?
Yeah, and I think there's loads of different factors in this one. Firstly, I think it's really important to kind of think about the fact that the workers don't really have the same protection or rights that we do. Very many of them aren't really working on kind of contracts, or the contracts aren't really being honoured. So they're quite vulnerable as workers. And I think brands obviously have a big part to play, both big and small. I definitely feel it. I'm not even a year old, but I feel like, God, I need to do something, or what can I do? And I'm asking those questions and trying to kind of come up with some sort of solution. But especially the bigger brands, they definitely have a part to play. Most, I think, and how it works in a very kind of, broad way is that, they kind of place their orders, factories go out, procure the materials, get the workers to make everything, send the garments out to the big brands, and then, then they will pay. And the issue is that some of the orders are being cancelled, halfway through production, when the factories have already invested their money and resources in kind of trying to, make all of these garments. So that's obviously a really tricky position for the factories to be in. So that has contributed to them not being able to necessarily pay. The government's in a really tricky position. They have pledged actually quite a lot of money. I think it's like 18 billion pounds worth. But there's obviously lots of challenges in getting the money and the resources to people in a country like India, which is massive. Logistically, I just can't imagine how challenging that probably is. But then I have been talking to designers, and lots of people are saying they possibly could do more. So it's a really tricky situation. But I think, brands definitely have a part to play, and I kind of hope to see more action on that side.
Yeah. I think one thing though that we haven't talked on, which I think is I'm not sure who, I might just kind of throw it out there and then see who raises their hand, but is a sort of manufacturing in the UK. Has the impact of coronavirus made us really think about, do we bring production home? I mean, I'm already thinking, but Esha, that's so sad, because all the amazing kind of hand loom and the making process and the beautiful kind of block printing pieces that you have and that you've sourced, that is so important as well in our kind of expression of self when it comes to fashion, which should be a real kind of unique expression. But then that doesn't say that all of those amazing things don't happen in the UK. It's just that they were more expensive pre-corona times.
Well, I think local production is great. I'm not just here to advocate.
No, I feel like I've now put that on you.
No, not at all. I think it would be great. I think we'd have to invest more in the industry here. I don't think, if you think about all the brands that are currently up and running here, in terms of having that skilled workforce probably to kind of produce, would be one thing to think about. And the only other thing I think about, I guess, is producing in India and other countries isn't necessarily a bad thing if we're paying people proper wages and we're doing it the right way. I just think that it has been tainted because there has been so much negativity, and there is so many things kind of going wrong in that end of the supply chain. So I think if there is a way to kind of work on that, that would be good. But I think obviously producing locally is fantastic as well. I think if we could do a bit of both, even better.
We have also had another question. If we produce everything locally, what happens to all the workers in places like India who depend on our business? Esha?
I guess just to quickly add on, I guess this is a really good time for all of us to think about what kind of system we want to go back to. I know that a lot of the designers I'm working with are kind of thinking, oh my God, this is terrible for the next 3 months or 6 months. But, will this make people appreciate, slow fashion, or, what actually goes into producing fashion? One of the designers I was talking to said, actually fashion is really resource intensive. It's expensive if it's done properly. And I think that's something for all of us to reflect on. But I don't think it's a case of kind of jobs disappearing from India. We have fantastic skill set, people with a fantastic skill set out there and who can do amazing things. I think it's just about thinking how we can rework the system to make sure that, we bring people up with us, and also think about sustainability from not just the Western perspective, but also about, building sustainable economies and communities. And if I think it's a tough conversation and not one that I have all the answers to right now, but I think if we can have those conversations and think about things perhaps differently, there might be a way that we can all kind of benefit together, rather than just some people benefiting and others kind of stuck in a cycle of poverty.
And you've got Shruti Jane on the Zoom chat is thoroughly in agreement with you there, Esha, and says you can produce in these countries cheaper and yet be ethical. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, which I think is a really excellent point. I know what we also haven't discussed is the funding. So we've also asked everybody who's joined this conversation that it was a free conversation to join, but that we were asking people to donate to the employee fund. And I know that Esha, that was something that, we all felt strongly about it, but that you had some more information about it. So could you just give a bit more information about where people's donations will be going to?
Absolutely. So just thank you firstly for anyone who has contributed, even as little as £5 would make a massive difference. But essentially, just to give you a bit of background, the Employees Fund was set up by the Lowie, so the designer behind that brand, because she felt that she wasn't in a great position to be able to provide salaries in the long term or the next couple of months for her employees. So she set up this fund, and actually as the fund has grown, more and more people have heard about it. Lots of kind of workers and artisans in the local area have appealed for help because they are, just not getting the kind of support that they need. They just don't have, they're running out of money essentially. So that's where the money is going. It's to make sure that people can kind of get that salary that they would have normally got, so that they can just buy the essentials that they need and pay their rent. So if you are able to donate, please do. I think it would be really welcomed.
Brilliant. And for those of you who have already donated, we're incredibly grateful, and we know that the money is going somewhere where it will directly benefit people who have been impacted by COVID-19.